Hello, good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Women's Magazine, a program that informs, educates on issues affecting women, their contribution to the development of our country, as well as their constraints and how we can work hand in glove to solve these problems. I am Fatoumata Simahan. The Vice President and Women's Affairs Minister and delegation were part of the recent South-South Cooperation meeting that was held in Belgium. The program gave a unique opportunity to hear first-hand accounts of African countries that are taking concrete measures to combat corruption. In the same action, Madam Jai Sedi, on the sideline of the Forum on African Women in Brussels, in her statement, Madam Jai Sedi highlighted the numerous strides made by President Jammeh in the advancement of women.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this 30th anniversary of the Crown Montana Forum under the theme, "The Time for Women Has Come," is indeed relevant and timely, not least considering the fact that there is an ongoing global review. We know in the past 2 years we've been reviewing towards 2015, that is the 8 MDGs. And most significantly, our reflections as well on shaping the way forward for the implementation of the post-2015 development agenda for sustainable development. And I think this is the right moment for us to ensure that whatever we discuss here is put on that development agenda, because it's important for women. And what is important for women is indeed important for the rest of the world. Because as I always say, development for women means development for all, not just for women, because indeed it trickles down to the rest of society. We discovered that the MDGs, as we are reviewing them now, is an unfinished business, because it has not, when you look at the 8 MDGs, women have not been mainstreamed in many of them, except those that are women-related. For example, the ICPD Conference on Population and Development that was held in Cairo in 1994, that is women-related. You look at issues of maternal mortality, child mortality, of course they are women-related. But as I said, even if where they are women-related, sometimes you go into it, you don't find gender perspectives being incorporated or mainstreamed in some of the MDGs. That is why we consider it an unfinished business. Come 2015, we want to see in the next 2 years what can happen towards 2015, so that something is done about at least the next 2 years to do something about the MDGs before we come to the post-MDG 2015. But we are already putting our agenda on 2015 so that it will not be like beyond 2015 rather, so that it would not be like the MDGs towards 2015. Why? How do we do that? We ensure that gender is mainstream in each of the goals that we set for ourselves beyond 2015 towards sustainable development. We also discussed in the United Nations in New York that we should have a standalone protocol just on women, in addition to mainstreaming women in all the other goals. And I think this meeting's recommendation can indeed be an input. At least we have one UN system represented here, or where I say 2 in 1. UNESCO obviously represents the UN. So we can put our ideas forward. Of course, we should also ensure that everything is clearly stipulated. That is, the goals that beyond 2015 are clearly stipulated, they are measurable and verifiable, and indeed the income should be so, and targets on gender. But wherever possible, also progress should be measured from a gender disaggregated perspective. Because that is critical, because if we don't have statistics, we are not convincing. We just go and say, oh, women should have equal rights, women's issues should be addressed in education, health, in social, economic matters. Show the statistics. Show where we are. Show gender statistics. And from there, you can convince them that this is the baseline and this is where we want to go. And I think that's where we need the assistance of our development partners, of course, including Crown Montana and all other partners in development. Of course, cognizant of this, the government of the Republic of Gambia as well, under the able and distinguished leadership of our President, His Excellency Sir Professor Alhaji Dr. A.J.J. Jammeh, since 1994, during the Second Republic, has put in place a number of measures to enhance women's empowerment in the Gambia, and that of girls as well, both politically, socially, economically. For example, in the field of education as well. This can be found at all levels of government, starting from the executive. Here you can see me and my colleague ministers are here. I'm here with the Minister of Justice and Attorney General, who is female. The Minister of Basic and Secondary Education is female. The Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly is female, and she's here with me, but she's also the Chairperson of the National Women's Council. We have grassroots representation as well. There's a women mobilizer out there with us. There are other senior government officials in our midst, and indeed other women in different walks of life, including civil society. So we are well represented here. So at the global level, the government has taken as well proactive measures and action by domesticating most of the international conventions, protocols, and agreements that we have signed and indeed we have ratified. We decided that that should be encapsulated in our Women's Act of 2010. So what we did was to domesticate them. Because unless you do that, it's one thing to sign and ratify, it's another thing to implement. We can only implement it when we domesticate it. I'm sure the Attorney General would tell you that. With her assistance and her team, we were able to do that in the Gambia. In addition, some of those were reflected in our women's policy, 2010 to 2020. With 2020 is also the timeline for our medium-term plan in the Gambia, the Program for Accelerated Growth and Employment. So it is indeed in line. And we have some of those conventions I can simply highlight, starting with Africa. We have the AU Protocol on Human and People's Rights, on the rights of women in Africa. We have signed, we have ratified, we've domesticated. We have the AU Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa. We have signed, ratified, and domesticated. But in addition to that, we also have, at the United Nations level, UN CEDAW of the 70s. We have signed, ratified, and domesticated that as well. Well, just to give you examples of some of those things we have done. Now, at the national level, I told you about the Constitution as well, which is the basic law of the land. The second Constitution is very progressive, more progressive than the 1970 Constitution we had in the Gambia, which now has a special section on women, the integration of women in development, and it's a very progressive one indeed, compared to the previous one. In, of course, Section 26 of that Constitution. In addition, the Women's Act, I already highlighted, Section 15, talks about special temporary measures being provided to be adopted to enhance women's participation and representation in decision-making. This section imposes an obligation, for example, on every organ, every body or institution or authority, for that matter, private enterprise inclusive, aimed at accelerating de facto equality between men and women in the Gambia. Of course, at the institutional level as well, policy decisions are also geared towards ensuring effective gender representation in all government institutions and agencies, as well as the private sector. This has resulted in more women actively participating in politics as elected and nominated members of the National Assembly, or Parliament as we say. More and more women are also in key decision-making positions in the Gambia, as managing directors, CEOs of enterprises, permanent secretaries, directors, ambassadors, name it. The list goes on. Recognizing, of course, that adequate access to credit is a prerequisite for economic empowerment of women, the government of the Gambia has succeeded in putting in place a mechanism that ensures not only timely access to credit,